Now, Jake, speaking of mental health, this week all eyes have been on Victoria. All eyes have been on Daniel Andrews for the last 1,400 days or something.
Yeah.
And that they've released their, so I don't know, it's almost like the almost as anticipated as the new Midnight Oil reunion, according to our YouTube views. The roadmap.
Yes, the roadmap out of lockdown.
Yeah, roadmap out of lockdown. It sounds like it should have its own theme song, doesn't it?
It actually should be a Midnight Oil album. the roadmap out of lockdown.
Roadmap out of lockdown. Yeah, okay. So this is really interesting. It's been fascinating watching the ebbs and flows of everyone's sort of opinions about it. And in this particular case, opinions really don't matter too much, I guess, because it's all about the facts. But let's start with the distinction between the fact that there's two separate roadmaps here. There's a roadmap for Melbourne.
Yes.
And there's a roadmap for regional Victoria.
Yeah, well, so this is, and you're so right to point out the important distinction there, because Melbourne is where the vast majority of Greater Melbourne, I should say, is where the great majority of coronavirus community transmissions have been taking place. When you see those large numbers, when you see those huge numbers, they are coming from major metropolitan centres.
Yeah.
Whereas the regional Victoria, they're having, essentially the end goal that was set out there where, coronavirus restrictions could be lifted, which is essentially an average of no more than 5 cases per day for over a fortnight.
Yeah, that was huge.
That's essentially where regional Victoria is at. They're at an average of 4 cases per day, I think, for over a fortnight now.
Okay.
So technically, they're pretty well on the cusp of being able to do it. Now, that's a technical statement and not necessarily the actuality, because it was noted last week that none of these restrictions are actually going to start easing until September 28th. It is one of those things that even though regional Victoria is, essentially they've met the criteria to ease on the restrictions, they won't be easing restrictions until around September 28th unless, something changes. And it is possible that something will change. I think the average has been for the last week and a bit under 50 cases per day in across Victoria, but again, the vast majority of those cases where transmission is being acquired in the community are in that sort of greater metropolitan Melbourne, and very few in regional. So it's a really interesting thing. A lot of the commentary has been, I would say, scathing, and I'd say that that's probably being nice. We've seen public health experts, epidemiologists who also happen to be, federal Liberal National Party members. Huge number of experts, as well as commentators, being extremely critical about. I suppose what they've referred to as rather draconian, rather slow, slow-moving actions to get Victoria out of these lockdowns. That has a lot to do with the fact that it is designed to be extremely cautious, essentially extremely slow moving. So it is meant to be one of those things that very slowly retracts the restrictions and, is constantly doing this repetitive loop of, hey, we're on the cusp now of moving forward. Should we move forward? What do our case numbers say? They have an evolving model, something that you're able to continuously plug in numbers and give you, predictions based on those numbers.
Yeah.
But so it is a very safe move, but I suppose a huge amount of the commentary has been about, hey, they've been in lockdown for almost hard lockdown, the stage 4 restrictions, for almost 2 months.
Yeah.
It's massive, and it's going to be in for another, several weeks. Business owners, the Business Council, even unions have been extremely critical about the fact, look, we just want to get outside, We just want to open our workplaces.
Yeah, look, I think it's easy to be critical, right? Obviously, because you're not the person making the decisions, or you're not part of the group making those particular decisions. I think it's really easy to be critical. I think that for the extreme criticisms that I've heard, have been around the fact that if New South Wales had the same sort of conditions as what Victoria has at the moment, then New South Wales would actually be in lockdown. We would be in a lockdown situation ourselves, and also that the modelling hasn't really been released to the public around that. I don't know how true that is, because I've seen a few websites that have said this is the modelling that they used. So I don't know how true.
Been released early on, and there was a lot of media comments. So when the roadmap was released, there was a couple of journalists who, look, this is what you actually want of journalists. They said, isn't it appropriate, Premier Andrews, that you release the modelling that shows that this is the right way forward?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't it appropriate that you show the public this is why we are doing this? Not just that we are doing this and this is our way out, but specifically this is why we are doing this. And as a consequence, I think they did release that modelling.
Okay, so the modelling has been released, which is good, and because we certainly don't want to be patronised during this time. We don't want to be so. Well, you guys aren't smart enough to understand it or anything like that. I know I'm not smart enough to understand it, but that's not the point. I want the people who are smart enough to understand it to explain it. I know there's been a lot of criticisms about it. He seems to be, I think there was an element of, well, yes, this is pretty full on. This seems pretty draconian. However, if he's flexible during this time, then we'll sort of be okay with it. And I think that he's proving himself to be, Dan is proving himself to be pretty flexible with this situation. Yep. I think he's proving himself to say, look, if I've heard it correctly this morning on the news, he's actually saying as early as next week we could reconsider bumping up some of these cases, because the cases are so low at the moment, like you pointed out. I think that criticism has been, heard, and I think that they're trying to, move on with some of those sort of leapfrogging of the restrictions. I also sort of, look, there's obviously clearly some politics in play here, especially with Scott Morrison and all that sort of stuff. I would say if he was a Liberal member, I don't think that there would be anywhere near as much criticism as what's been coming out, but they do have to be careful with their criticisms, because they also don't want to be responsible for saying, well, you should relieve all of these, all of the restrictions that you've put on everyone, and then lead to a third wave right before Christmas. I mean, we know that the economy would just be crushed. We know that the next couple of months are absolutely critical for so many businesses, including small businesses, which means it's critical for younger people, critical for women who are on the, who are in all these flexible workplaces and have these flexible working hours. We know that this is absolutely critical these next couple of months for the economy in general and for people's well-being in general as well. So I think that's, it's an interesting move to sort of come out and say, well, hang on, it's a bit draconian or anything like that at this stage. I think that he's trying to do the best that he can, or the team of people are trying to do the best that they can to make sure that everything happens before Christmas, which is a tremendously important time for us this time of year.
Yeah, I do think, as much as it is interesting, and we'll go into some more, border commentary down, further in this episode. But it is really interesting, the interplay between the Liberal Prime Minister and the Labor premiers.
Yeah.
To your point, I'm not actually sure that a Liberal Premier would shut down. I mean, when you sort of look at the way that Gladys Berejiklian reacted to the Sydney, I wouldn't call it a second wave because it was really just so well contained versus
sure was.
But it really
Go
was.
team.
It really was. Versus, the Victorian response where you just had that, maximal response and maximal proliferation throughout the community. But yeah, look, it is one of those interesting things. The way that this interplay between the Prime Minister and other ministers, such as goodness me, what's Peter Dutton?
Yeah,
Peter Dutton and other ministers just really laying into the Labor premiers across Australia.
Yeah, that's not something I'd really considered. What other options would they have if they actually had a Liberal government in there? That would be interesting to find that out. Have a little bit of a side, an alternative universe where we could run that experiment.
It's actually interesting that you say that, Greg,
because there's a video game coming out called Coronavirus Lockdown.
The Liberal opposition leader for Victoria has released some alternative modelling, an alternative roadmap.
What do you know any of the details of that one?
No, but they have. They have essentially they're calling for they're calling for Victoria to move into stage 3 almost immediately and start scaling back, because essentially the numbers now are so much less.
Okay, see, and that to me sounds like a political game, because he's already come out and said that he would be flexible around that. So, for them to come out and say this, and if he does actually move on that, they get to say, well, we suggested it, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know. It's a bit of a tricky one. I would hate to be in either situation at the moment. I'd hate to be in the opposition's, seat, and I'd hate to be in the actual seat making, well, I don't know if I'd hate to be, but, it certainly would be challenging.
It's such a rock and a hard place, seriously, because you open up and all of a sudden coronavirus is back. It's knocking on your door.
Yeah.
And you are then obliged for a number of different reasons to then lock down again. But you've just opened up. So all of those people that have gone back to work and have tried to be, productive citizens of the community now have to close down their businesses again, lay off their workers. I understand exactly, to a reasonable extent, I understand the strategy behind Dan Andrews really pushing for 0 cases or as close to as possible, because it would have been already so demoralising when they had to shut down for this second wave, particularly in terms of consumer confidence, business confidence in Victoria. And, look, we're talking from our position of privilege with, we're only allowed 10 people at the moment around in Queensland, but that's still vastly better than not being able to go to our workplace, not being able to do exercise greater than 5 kilometres away, et cetera. It's pretty. They're pretty onerous restrictions at the moment in Victoria, but rock and a hard place.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a shout out to a few people that we know in Melbourne. We know the boys from the Politics Over Coffee. Politics Over Coffee are in lockdown still. So shout out to them, and a shout out to my auntie Jan and my cousins Penelope and Jeffrey, all in lockdown down there. I think that they sometimes listen to the Pouch podcast. So hello, and we hope you're sane. Are you okay?
Yeah. We're not allowing dialogue back to us though.
No, and Pete is down there as well, isn't he?
He is, yeah. As
Pete Smisson,
my godfather and his partner Grant and Stephen. There are lots of lockdown arenas. Yeah. Look, they'll have to get together and talk about how amazing the Pouch is once all of these restrictions are distance, an appropriate
subside.
Distance.
Yeah.